Welcome everyone to this session, which is part of the Global People's Assembly. This is a session that focuses on climate change, community-led development, and land rights. And we have a great lineup of speakers for you coming up. So thanks for staying on the line and joining us for this next discussion. We'll be covering quite a range of different aspects of climate and land rights. We'll be hearing from Daisy from the Hunger Project based in Uganda on community-led development, the link to the SDGs and land rights. We'll be hearing from Philip Kilonzo from PACJA, the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, linking the nexus issues of land tenure, climate change, vulnerability for indigenous communities, and looking ahead to the COP in Egypt in a month or so's time. And also we'll be hearing from Latin America, and we hope we have Silvia Piloy from the Lecos people of Bolivia, who will discuss land rights for indigenous peoples in Bolivia and the use of the Escazu Agreement as a way of defending those rights. So please do stay with us, and there'll be time for discussions later on in the call. So to kick us off, I would love to welcome.
I'm sorry, Ollie,
yes.
For the interpretation, can that be said?
Of course, yes. For those who are not yet familiar, I'm sure most of you have already been on this call over previous days, but for those who are not familiar, we do have interpretation for this session. You'll see at the bottom of your screen a little globe sign. If you click on that globe sign, you have the options there of French and Spanish. And so if you would like to listen in French or Spanish, you'll have the interpretation there. And likewise, we may have a Spanish speaker later on. And at that point, if you choose English, if you would like to hear the interpretation in English, so you'll need to enable that interpretation when you hear a speaker in Spanish. So just be aware of that in the interpretation box at the bottom. So thank you again, and thank you to Ingo, thank you to all of the partners and co-organizers from PACJA, from the Hunger Project, and from Reacción Climática. It's great to be here. I'm Ollie from Action for Sustainable Development. And now to kick us off, our first speaker will be Daisy from the Hunger Project. Daisy, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Ollie. I'm happy to be part of this occasion, these discussions, and yeah, they've just introduced me, but let me also share my screen. I hope I have the rights, Ollie. I wanted to share a white screen, but I think I have to go back.
We see it, Daisy. Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, and is it big enough, or I do the...
You can go to slideshow. Wonderful, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Yes, so thank you so much. And as per the session, I'll be talking about the understanding SDGs. I doubt whether maybe some people want to understand, but in the context of community-led development, and also the land rights. As they've just introduced me, I've called Daisy Owomugasho. I'm the regional director for the Hunger Project in East Africa. As everybody knows who has been talking, on September 25th in 2015, all the leaders committed to transforming our world and drew up the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. those are the SDGs as we know them today. What I want to bring to your attention is that on that same day, during a plenary session on hunger and poverty, the movement for community-led development was also created, basically in recognition that all the SDGs required integrated strategies at the community level. During that process, the Secretary General then also recognized some essential elements of the SDGs, and some people have called them clusters, some people have called them thematic areas, and basically there are 6, although some people also talk about 5. But at that time, we are looking at the 6 thematic areas. And one of them, or the first, was the people. I think it is coming up over and over again to ensure healthy lives for all the people and a better state of development for improvements and amelioration of living standards. The second one was the planet, to utilize the resources sustainably, protect natural resources, and also climate for future generations. The other one was prosperity, to grow a strong economy that can sustain a country's future, as well as the country's citizens. Then justice, to promote a safe environment with strong institutions and peaceful societies. Partnership, to develop good global relationships with other nations for innovation and sustainable development. And the last one was dignity, to put an end to poverty and oppose inequality in all nations. So those were the 6, although some have classified them as, recently you hear about the 5 Ps, people, planet, prosperity, partnerships, and peace. Yeah, I think the classification maybe can be according to what one needs to do. And these, particularly the SDGs, were left to national governments to implement and then report. But our question still now remains, or is, or was then, who is actually going to implement and achieve these goals? As the, okay, is it okay? I hear some voice. As the hunger project, we usually start with this local woman. I'm not very sure how, okay, this is the woman we look at as the, maybe the rural woman. You can see the child on her back with a simple hoe, and she probably goes on foot, or walks on foot. Her world basically rotates within around 10 to maybe 15 kilometer radius. So is there a health center within her area? Is there a school? Those are the issues we are looking at. All these SDGs, we are talking about poverty, we are talking about zero hunger, we are talking about access to water. Access. Do all these, are they available within her community? But if we are looking at this, we are also looking at her fundamental rights to participate in governance or in issues or in decision-making on where, or the issues which actually affect her. And this is where community-led development comes in, or came in. We're looking at how can she actually participate? How can she be part of the processes or issues that are actually affecting her life? So this is where we came in and said, we need this community-led development, and we have a space where communities can actually participate in issues that affect them. Wow, my whatever is not moving. Eh? So here we are looking at the link. she's creating the link between sustainable development goals, but also the community-led development approach. If we are looking at the SDGs, we are looking at a blueprint for a better future for somebody like her, and something or a space, a framework in which all these goals and actions are taken simultaneously to address issues, all issues, in the context of leave no one behind, reach the farthest person. And what we have seen is that everybody all agree that although these SDGs are mutually independent, the emphasis is on integration and synergies. So what we see is that the apparent overlap between many of the SDGs and the aims and methods of the many community-led development approaches, they suggest that there's a potential for SDGs to link them bottom up, these people in the grassroots, the local action on the part of communities with the governments and intergovernmental action on sustainability. So this is where we are seeing the link between SDGs and the communities on how they can participate through the community-led development approaches. We realize that the community-led development initiatives can actually provide a potential implementation vehicle for SDGs, because while the SDGs represent a possible opportunity to mainstream or upscale prior and ongoing action undertaken at the community level or at community scale. So we find that what we are trying to say is that community-led development contributes to SDGs principles of reaching the farthest behind, maybe they put first, and also leaving no one behind. So what we have is that the community-led development approaches, they usually reach those categories which are marginalized, the landless, and most of these are the world's most vulnerable. The small-scale farmers, like that woman who lack effective property rights, they lack economic power, and their potential basically remains untapped. And these are mostly also women, they are mostly the youth, they are children, and they also suffer from unfair or equal relations. So these are the people we are looking at, and they operate outside the formal legal system. So their opportunities are basically not exploited. They cannot access credit, and most of the others, even in markets. So this is where we feel like the link, these community-led initiatives can come through the SDG framework through the community-led development approach. If we go through some of the goals which are basically attaching on land issues, I picked just 3 which have sort of a direct link, and there are some others, maybe like 4, which also talk about land issues. But if we look at goal 1 in ending poverty in all its forms everywhere, there is some areas where you are looking at land specifically. This goal 1 identifies the explicit link between poverty and access of the poor to the means to strengthen land tenure security. And especially sub-goal 1.4, we are looking at by 2030 to ensure that all men and women, and in particular the poor and the vulnerable, have equal rights to economic resources, as well as access to basic services and ownership and control over land. So, and it continues. So we have an explicit sub-goal on ownership and control over land. That is land and other forms of property inheritance. So which we are talking about as land rights. Goal 2, in terms of ending hunger, it has end hunger, achieve food security, and improved nutrition, and promoting sustainable agriculture. So for this one, we are looking at it emphasizes the importance of small-scale agricultural production of producers to also feeding the world's poor and vulnerable. And again, we have this particular aspect, secure equal access to land. So land is coming in, and also other productive assets. So we have goal 2 also looking at issues to do with land. And goal number 5 in achieving gender equality and empowerment, and empower all women and girls. Sub-goal 5A is also about women's control over land. And we are looking again, talking about access to ownership and control over land. So if we go back to our woman, let's look at her again. Is anybody sure that the land she's stealing is hers, or can we say, confirm, yes, this land is hers? Does she have control over her land? They are talking about even access to newer technologies. Looking at this from 2015, does she have access to new technologies, finance, credit, property rights, all those aspects? So if we are looking at it in terms of livelihoods, in terms of not leaving anyone behind, in terms of the last person, this is the woman we are looking at with the child on her back, and we are asking ourselves, is she actually being addressed by these SDGs, or how can we make sure that she's actually not left behind? So we see the SDGs having some potential, and we have seen, for example, that there is some inclusion of land goals and strategies, but some people believe that, or some critics say that not enough is being done, and maybe some of the next speakers will enlighten us on this, what is being done, what is not being done. But there is a belief that not enough is being done to foster an international commitment to securing land and property rights for women, for indigenous groups, for local communities. And the insecurity of the land tenure and the property rights is still seen as the precipitating, if not the primary cause of the contemporary global poverty and inequality. And we also believe that some SDGs have the potential to play a critical role in building solidarity and commitment to land and property rights reform. So with this in mind, we believe we also have something we can do. And what I believe, or what most people believe, is that us as the NGO community, the civil society organizations, community-based organizations, all of us can help governments recognize the implications of neglecting community land rights. And I believe that all communities, villagers, everybody whose members have the most to lose must share their perspective on collective rights and community land. They have a stake in the land rights, and we need them to be part of the process. And that's why we are bringing in, or reintroducing, or coming up again, community-led development. We have to have the communities, the key stakeholders on the table as also part of the discussions on how they can maintain or have these land rights. And we also must support and assist these communities to amplify their voices, to be able to reach on the table actually. How can they reach their governments? How can they reach the decision makers? How can they reach those involved in implementation of the SDGs, the governments, the development partners, their representatives? That is our what we believe that we can do to assist these communities. And of course, we have to recognize the importance of secure community land rights to rural livelihoods and well-being, and also indeed achieving SDGs. If we go back to we have the basic economics. It's where they used to tell us the key components of the factors of production. You are looking at land, labor, and the capital. So how do we make sure that actually this rural woman has the land because she's providing the labor and maybe some small capital, not the whole, to be able to use and also participate in her own development? Because I believe that this is critical for her, or if we are not going to leave anyone behind. So let's keep land issues also at the heart of SDGs, as land is one of the key components for production. So I thank you so much, and I hope that you can join the community, the movement for community-led development, be part, and I've shared the web page. You can check it out and see if we can all together address some of these land issues through the community-led development approach. I thank you so much.
Thank you, Daisy. That really was an excellent presentation. You covered so much ground and you really managed to situate this discussion in the SDGs, but really bringing it to life with some very, very clear examples of how those land rights can be applied and who are the communities that should have those land rights and should be enabled to guarantee those land rights. So thank you so much, Daisy. And I think, I believe that Philip now will take us through and take these ideas further and begin also to prepare us for the COP that's coming up later this year. So Philip, over to you next, please, from PACJA, the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. Welcome.
Thank you, Oli. I think the background has been set and Daisy has done quite good work in terms of setting the foundation. And I'll just begin by first and foremost pointing to the injustices and how the injustices are playing in a much more broader context. I think, and I usually argue that I fail to understand most of the times, why is it that paper, just owning a piece of paper gives you a sense of entitlement, and who brought in this paper that becomes the title to the land, and that paper is not available for those who own land in a communal manner or in a community setting. And basically you begin to see the tenure systems that are in place and how tenure rights are recognized being the first and foremost entry point to violation of rights. And it is indeed important we begin looking at that in context, because when you look at most of the indigenous communities, communities owning land in common, again, you'll find them within Africa and within other less developed countries. And that is where tenure rights are extremely under threat and extremely vulnerable. That vulnerability in itself exposes the communities to other multiple vulnerabilities, which is quite important for us to underscore. And indeed, there are less safeguards, and where traditional safeguards did exist to guarantee land rights are also under constant threat or constant weakening for purposes of, again, exploiting resources. It is indeed in community lands in many places that you find a number of resources, whether it's forest, whether it's water resources, whether it's mineral resources, among other resources. And therefore, as you begin to look at security of tenure, you will find part of the weakening of that security of tenure is deliberate to ensure that there is free access to these resources. And these resources, as we speak, whether it's forest, whether it's water, sit at the heart of resilience building for these particular communities. Whether it's pasture lands, again, they sit at the heart of resilience building, and it's indeed important we lay that bit of our background. Indeed, in some certain indigenous and communal land, you will find pockets of rich biodiversity. And biodiversity, again, is at the heart of resilience building. But again, you'll find it is the same biodiversity that is actually under threat as, again, global strife continues to really take community land away from them. There used to be existence of patterns of use of land, because again, there are notions of whether community land or indigenous pieces of land are idle land. Those are notions, because you'll find that there existed a pattern of interaction between communities and natural resources across communities that used to use land in such a communal setup. And that pattern of how they interacted, how they migrated, how they engaged with the use of those resources, indeed determined their resilience and the ability to withstand shocks within their environment. They could migrate when the situations forces them to migrate. In some communities, they had even clearly stipulated systems of grazing and watering patterns, meaning that they could reserve their strategic pasture lands, their strategic water resources for purposes of being able to access them during drought and during seasons when it is indeed inaccessible. And that enabled them to cope with vagaries of climate change. This has, of course, over time been eroded, overrun, and it has been overrun as, again, other actors begin to see how best to tap on these resources and move them to the next level. Of course, within the community land, we've seen massive investments over time, and these massive investments have also resulted into other injustices, whether it's mining activities that is going on, which have led to soiling of water sources, pollution, and again, spikes in air pollution, because we've actually seen land being left unattended. We've also seen situations where rivers that used to pass through community land have been soiled completely, and the water is no longer accessible, meaning greater vulnerabilities of these communities to vagaries. We've also seen situations where rivers are obstructed upstream, and therefore communities who are downstream and lie on those rivers under communal tenure system are unable to access the same resource, resulting in greater vulnerability to issues of climate change in eventualities the climate changes. So we've seen basically all these trends. But what is also happening within communal land then is, again, that the communities are being shrunk out of their own communal land. Whether it's fisherfolk, they are being pushed out of those areas with a rich potential for fishing. Whether it's actually grazing land, we are seeing areas that we largely describe as ecotones being largely taken out of these particular communities and being used mainly for wildlife conservations and conservation agenda, taking center stage and pushing and edging the communities away. So essentially, we are basically saying over time that the communities who have relied on land and the resources within the land are again being pushed out of it and increasingly becoming more vulnerable to climate change. Of course, the limited security of tenure for these particular communities have again limited options for investments in terms of building resilience, because as you start to build resilience, then fundamental questions arise regarding to whose resilience are you really trying to build. Coming back to then the measures that have so far been put in place in terms of responding to climate change, we also begin to see some certain measures that are being proposed to address issues of climate change, worsening the already vulnerable situations of communities who live in this piece of land. We've seen urban sites in their strive to meet their water deficiencies as a result of climate change, again, tapping on water sources that are in community land, draining those water reservoirs, and then moving that water to urban sites. Again, that is a disadvantage to communities. We've seen a number of investments, whether it's in wind, whether it's in solar, whether it's in geothermal, again resulting into additional displacement and taking portions of land that were controlled by this particular community, in the spirit of again implementing clean mechanisms for providing energy. Of course, the power is evacuated and communities are really benefiting from these investments, which ordinarily should be the case. We've seen again what we call the RED+ projects, and again, in the same spirit, private investors acquiring pieces of land for purposes of investing in similar projects, displacing the same communities from their own communal land, which ordinarily ought not to be the case. Right now, we have a number of water-related projects in forms of dams, which are again being funded with a lot of climate finance, which are also further displacing the communities, and all these have implications. And of course, the mining agenda continues unabated. But within the community land, we still have a solution, and we have a proposition that could work in terms of enabling us address the challenge that is posed both by climate change, but also by insecurity of tenure. And we begin by first looking at how can the communities, indigenous communities, be in the forefront in terms of leading in adaptation actions, be it locally led adaptation action or any other form of adaptation action that places at the center the efforts, the drive by local community. That becomes quite pivotal in terms of premising solutions for climate change and security of tenure. And again, within it, civil societies have had in-depth discussions, and they've generated what we call locally led adaptation action principles, which again place the power around decision making, as well as actually they place the power on decision making on the local communities, as well as strengthening the ability to address structural inequalities. If we are able to move forward in terms of treating these particular issues, then we will be able to premise some certain solutions that vest power back to communities to better control the adaptation agenda. But then we are also talking about nature-based solutions for addressing climate change. And as you begin looking at nature-based solutions, then you begin looking at how indigenous communities have interacted with their ecosystems over time. Indeed, this is what has been described as barbaric, remote previously, but it is proving to be well placed in terms of helping communities to move to the next level. Now, as we build up to COP27, then we need to look at what is that we need to do and do it urgently, beginning now. The first is beginning looking at indigenous communities as a critical block that need to be mobilized, that needs to be conscientized around their rights, and that again needs to be in the driver seat around the processes towards COP. Then secondly, what is very important is again to begin to connect their control of land natural resources and placing that at the center of building resilience in conversations that are happening within COP process. So that again, we are not looking at the whole response spectrum around issues of climate change, divorcing them with the control of land natural resources, which are quite critical and quite central to all these processes, because it is indeed important we have a bit of holistic view of the kind of investments that needs to be done across all spheres, as well as strengthening tenure rights, and how that plays in terms of building resilience. We must build platforms for indigenous communities to amplify their issues, tell their story, and also be a bit more propositional in that particular regard. But then more importantly, we must begin looking at what does just transition mean for these particular communities, because you cannot actually talk about just transition without looking at the response measures under climate change and how they are vesting greater control of communities to the entirety of the transition process, including the ability to control the resources, the land and natural resources, which are quite critical to them. We were just having a quick conversation as I just closed my thoughts. We were just having a conversation with a few of my colleagues regarding to what does it mean to have a just transition. in context of the current climate variability, particularly where communities are experiencing losses and damages. And it is indeed clear that you must begin by fixing their livelihoods. And their livelihoods, particularly for indigenous communities, are premised on land and natural resources. And therefore, you cannot fix those livelihoods without going back to the fundamentals and looking at how are you addressing their security of tenure and strengthening those elements, as well as addressing the erosions on their livelihood systems that has happened, as well as remodeling back the livelihood systems that were quite sustainable. That indeed requires that we ensure that in our engagement as we get to COP27, we are pushing for climate financing that is accessible to communities in the front line of climate crisis. And that is how we will bring the change. Thanks.
Thank you, Philip, and thank you for that real rallying call at the end there, highlighting some of the key demands that we have as civil society for the upcoming COP, and highlighting some of those really strong examples of how community-led development and indigenous rights are so closely entwined with combating climate change and ensuring biodiversity. So this has been a really strong discussion so far, and I'm really pleased to say that we have our third speaker coming directly from an indigenous community in Bolivia. I'm hoping that we can hear her, Sylvia, from the Lecos people in Bolivia. Sylvia, I'm not sure whether you can unmute. Otherwise, I believe we may hear you through Carmen's connection. Carmen, yes, please go ahead.
Hello, Oli. Silvia, can you speak? ¿Puedes hablar?
Bienvenida, Silvia.
Hola, Sil.
We're not hearing it yet, Carmen. Are you able, Carmen, to give us an initial introduction, and then perhaps Sylvia can come in when she's able to? Carmen?
Yeah, yes. And
Hola, Carmen, hola.
hola, Sil, ¿ya puedes hablar?
Sí, Carmen, ¿me escuchas? ¿Me
Sí.
escuchan? Hola, sí, ya.
Sí, escuchamos, por favor, puede participar.
Buenos días, mi nombre es Silvia Lita. Soy una mujer lideresa, una mujer indígena de tierras bajas de la Amazonía paseña. Mi pueblo es el pueblo negro.
Carmen, did we lose Sylvia? Carmen, I don't think we can hear Sylvia. Are you able just to...
Silvia, Silvia, se te escucha. Se escucha mal, así que, hola, ¿me escuchas? Okay.
Carmen, I don't think we can hear. Are you able, Carmen, to relay what you're hearing on your phone and speak yourself?
Yes, definitely. Well, Silvia, she's from the Leco community. It's in the north of the country. Sí, tú me vas a hablar y yo voy a hablar en inglés, Sil.
Ya, súper, ya. Hola, buenos días.
Silvia Lipa, she is from Bolivia. She is a leader from the Leco community. She lives in the Amazonia. Her territory is a mining territory. Since she was born, the minery has always occurred in her territory. But from that time to now, a lot of things have changed in the territory. And now we're living the consequences of not using well the territory, not having a good use of the territory. Of this economic activity, which is the gold mining, which is the main productive activity in the place. This, as a consequence of this, we have at the beginning, it was artisanal mining when she was a child, but in the last 15 years, exploitation is open sky and more mechanized. They have a lot of machinery going, and that's what is damaging the whole ecosystem. Sí, seguí, Silvia. As a consequence of that, the women there, they have realized that they are damaged, that the environment has been damaged and the rivers have been contaminated, and that they have always used mercury, but now, like 3 years ago, we're learning that the mercury is damaging. We didn't know that mercury could be damaged to our health. So what we need in the territory is to raise awareness, because this economic activity, we cannot stop it. Sí, seguí, Silvia. It's the same Bolivian, the state, the government of Bolivia that guarantees the miners that they can work on this issue. There are laws that protect the miners and not the indigenous people. And that becomes a problem because the miners are invading their territories. The indigenous communities are owners of the superficial part of the soil where the animals are, where the trees are, but underneath the soil, that belongs to the state, to the government. That doesn't belong to the indigenous territory. That's the policy in the government. So they can manage that and they can give it to whoever they want. Can be corporations, can be enterprises, can be miners. And the state will give them concessions, and that's how they are displacing whole indigenous communities on behalf of miners. So the indigenous communities of our territory, they have been able to learn a little bit more about the laws to defend their territory. And now they have stopped a lot of mining companies that wanted to get into the indigenous community because of the issue of the mercury. And now we are raising awareness about the mercury situation. We are in the high part of the basin of the river Beni. And we know that the studies in the lower part of the basin have a lot of mercury contaminations because they are fishers. They hunt, but they're not miners. Nevertheless, they are contaminated by mercury, and there are the people in the high part of the basins are the ones that are using the mercury. So we're trying to generate the change in order, especially in the management of mercury and of the economic, and they want to stop the mining activity, and they want to build these new alternatives as to change the economic vision of the mining, because they move political issues, leader issues, because many leaders are managed by this situation, but the women want to change this situation, and they don't want to generate only income by minery. So they are looking at another alternatives, and that's their silent struggle and to introduce these new income activities where they can grow animals in their houses. They are also working on artisan things like necklaces and things like that with the seeds. So these are some of the alternatives that they have using the forest, and there is another vision so that they can sustain their territory without having to do with mining. And that's why it's important to lead women's organizations, because they can turn the face of the coin, so the territory doesn't only do mining, but they can have another kind of alternatives. Unfortunately, leaders, especially male leaders, are closing their doors for them, so they cannot speak their problems with mercury. So they have to face this situation, and they have to start speaking on behalf of the indigenous women. And it's sad that unfortunately mining also buys indigenous leaders. So that's why it's important that women can generate other incomes that's not minery.
Carmen,
Estamos en línea, Silvia. We are online.
I'm afraid,
Thank
Carmen, we're running out of time for our session. But I think what we've heard there from Sylvia has been incredibly strong, and I think it's really given us very, very clear examples of some of the rights issues that Philip was highlighting, that the rights of the traditional peoples who live on their lands, indigenous rights, are not being recognized, and instead the mining rights are being given over their heads and directly to corporations. And I think that's a very, very strong example. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for being able to act as the interpreter and opening that door to hear directly from the experience in the Amazon region. I wish we had more time. There's never enough time in these sessions. I do want to give one final chance for our other two panelists
Silvia wants to say bye. That's
yes. Okay.
Ya,
Yes.
muchas gracias. Gracias por toda la atención y por darme este espacio de conocer y dar a conocer lo que estamos haciendo las mujeres indígenas aquí en Bolivia, en la Amazonía de Bolivia.
Muchísimas gracias, Silvia. Thank you so much for participating. It's been very strong, and we look forward to continuing to share your story. I would like to give just 30 seconds each to Daisy and Philip for any concluding remarks before our session finishes. Daisy, over to you.
Wow, thank you so much. I don't have any concluding remarks as such, but just to emphasize that as land is a key issue in development. If you don't have land, you don't have where to, you are missing out on a major means of production. And if we look at Africa and most of the developing countries, most of the economies are actually based on, or they are surviving on these rural women, the poor people, the farmers. So their access to land becomes very critical for the success of the SDGs. They impact on food security, impact on the well-being, impact on health, on nutrition, and so many other aspects. So we have to think again and see how we can support these communities to actually own and access land, and also particularly those ones who are missing out because of some legislation or otherwise, and their lands are actually being taken from them. So we have to look at land as a key component for the success of the SDGs. And definitely we have to get the communities involved in determining or making decisions that actually affect them regarding land issues and others.
Thank you, Daisy. Thank you so much. And thank you for the very clear links to the SDGs. And please feel free to put in the chat again the link to the community-led development movement that you described earlier. I'm sure that many people would want to find out more. So Philip, the final word to you, and we really have very little time left. So maximum 1 minute. Philip, back to you.
Thanks. I think I'll try to survive within the 1 minute. I'll basically say that we cannot basically talk about building resilience to climate change without securing tenure rights for communities, because security of tenure underpin the nature of response actions that are being implemented to build resilience. And more importantly, as we begin to even begin thinking about how actions can be locally led from below, it is indeed important we begin to look at that as part of the broader resilience planning within the communities, with the centrality of tenure rights taken on board. I think most of the indigenous communities have intimate relationship between land, natural resources, and the role that those resources do play in terms of their livelihood systems. And therefore, it is indeed important that climate financing is provided, again, reinforces the livelihood options for these particular communities, while again strengthening tenure rights. Plans for response, again, must be people-centered, so that again it reinforces systems that are in place, as well as natural ecosystems, or even nature-based solutions that the communities have been promoting in those pieces of land. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Philip. Philip from Pakja, it's been really great to hear all of your insights and to get that really in-depth understanding of some of the key areas of intersection between climate, land rights, and long-term land tenure. Thank you so much. And perhaps Daisy and Philip and Carmen and all of those who've been involved in putting this together, perhaps we can think about a joint session at the COP to continue the conversation in November in Egypt. But for today, I think it's been a very, very rich discussion. And thank you so much again to all of our speakers. And thank you in particular also to Sylvia for joining us all the way from the Bolivian Amazon. It's been a very rich discussion. And we look forward to continuing this on the road towards the COP. So now let me pass back to Dipanshu to prepare you for the next session. I know it's a packed schedule during the People's Assembly. So thanks again, and over to you, Dipanshu.
Thank you, Oli. Just a few minutes, a few seconds for me to set up the next session. Meanwhile, the organizers can let us know when we can start.